Welcome to the Birth Your Book podcast. We are here with Caitlin Ramsey Wolford, who has written a training manual called Interpreters Supporting Interpreters for her organization CORE. And Caitlin, I'll let you share a little bit more about what the organization is and what the manual is, if you'd like to share.
For sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. Shout out to you for editing this book and for working with us. The editing process was a journey, as we all know. I feel like anyone who's written a book can definitely feel that and knows that the pain and also the love that comes with it. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I would say so. CORE itself, I think it's important to kind of talk about the organization and then I can move into the purpose of the book. So the name of the mentorship program that I run is called CORE Interpreters, and CORE is an acronym for colleague advancement, outreach, resources, and ethics. And our mission statement is actually the book title, which is Interpreters Supporting Interpreters. And CORE is a 6-month mentorship program for sign language interpreters. And the goal of the mentorship program is there's a gap between when interpreters finish their interpreter training program. So that could be at a local college or a university or what have you. And, or they could be a child of a deaf adult, and they're trying to get certified, so to become a full-fledged working professional. And so there's a gap that's happened for many, many years, and the interpreting field has been aware of this gap, but no one has really figured out what's the silver bullet to resolve that gap. And so when I graduated from Gallaudet, shout out, go Bisons, I quickly realized that I was also in the gap and saw a huge need. And so CORE was birthed out of that situation back in 2017. And then as the program continued to grow, there was a clear need as more and more people were joining CORE. Instead of printing off multiple templates and guidelines for how to be in the program, it became very apparent in 2020 that the best way to move forward, especially with 6 different chapters, currently in 2022, and in that time we knew more chapters would be popping up across the nation, that we needed to have a book and essentially a toolkit for our mentors and mentees who are working together. So people were kind of speaking the same language. People knew that they could rely on this resource and that this tool could be something that mentors could lean into if they were new to mentoring, or people who have been mentoring for years could lean into this book and get what they needed to continue forward with a positive mentorship experience. And so that's kind of how the book itself became what it became. It did not start off, with 100 pages. It started off with a couple, I'm sure you remember, I think it was Canva infographics that I showed you. And you're like, we got to push this out more. This doesn't all make sense. And so I was grateful that you helped me think through what is the main goal here and what are we trying to say. And my partner in crime, who is Kat Perchik, shout out to Kat, she's great, also kind of got in my brain, and between the two of you, I felt like I was able to better define. I have the vision. How do we get it on paper and make it make sense to other people? Aren't in my brain. And so that's kind of how that all took place.
Have you had experiences of people using the book to just guide them in their journey? Like, what has that been like?
So I would say within CORE and outside of CORE, I've seen people taking advantage of the book, including like local ITP professors, interpreter training professors, rather, who have used it in their programs. So I've seen it there. CORE website, it's coreinterpreters.com. We actually have a free resource library on there that we created that a lot of people, there's ethical scenarios when you're working as an interpreter. There's a career map on there. Our manifesto, which is like a draft example of what it means. It's actually in the book too, but it's basically like a template draft for mentors and mentees when they're working together to have shared common goals shared across them and how they plan to work together while they're in core. So all of those are free resources that,
Great.
Yeah, it's great. So shameless plug there for coreinterpreters.com resource library. It's free.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Sounds like some repurposing on various ends too.
Well, we were able to pull stuff from the book too, which I thought was great, and then make that available to everyone instead of them having to buy it from online. I would say too, though, that to answer your question more directly, I would say the people who have used it outside of core for a resource, there have been bits and pieces, like almost like little nuggets they can take and little gems they can take that they can apply to their own mentorship relationship, even if they're not formally in the core program. But again, the whole book itself, I would say, mainly is used for core purposes because it's part of the quote unquote curriculum, right? It's the toolkit that we give to our mentors and mentees in the program to help them succeed and to help them, like I said, that common shared language, because everyone's education experiences, their backgrounds all vary. And so get them all reading from the same, book.
Yeah.
It gives people that shared experience.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And do you want to say anything more about just your overall purpose in creating this book and core? I know you have talked about it already, but anything else you want to share around that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things that I realized, and part of the drive and the heart behind running core, so a lot of people don't know, it's not my full-time job. This is like my passion project, my brainchild that was originally built to the DC area where I am. I'm based out of Washington, DC. And then it kind of just took off because other states have the same problem. And we're recognizing that we need mentorship in our state. You already have the wheels. Can we just, take those wheels and keep it moving over here? And it kind of felt like that symbiotic relationship between DC and then connecting the entire field was really one of the main drivers for me to keep going in the capacity that I have for such a long time now. But I would say for sure that the main driving factor was having some conversations with my friends who are deaf and hard of hearing, and they show up to their job, they show up to medical appointments, they show up to performing arts and to university to get a PhD, and they don't have skilled and qualified interpreters sitting in front of them. And so the person at the end of the day who is being negatively impacted are the deaf people. And so seeing that our retention rates in the interpreting field are really low, interpreters can't get certified or feel they're not qualified yet to become certified. They don't feel like they have the tools to become certified. And that gap has been there for such a long time. It felt like the right answer to get involved and to do something.
Yeah. That seems crazy. Like that we don't have interpreters in more locations. It just, as you're saying it, I mean, I feel a little silly, but I just am not, it's like not usually part of my world to know a lot about the deaf community. And it should be like, why is, I don't know, it seems nuts to me.
Yeah, I mean, and you could have interpreters in your area, but they could not be qualified. Or you could have a situation where it is a supply demand issue that we're working with, and the market is there. There's a desire, there's a need for interpreting services from deaf and hard of hearing individuals across the United States and really the world. I mean, there's a shortage out here, and we have to figure out a way to retain folks because there will always be deaf people, and there will be people using American Sign Language. And so if that is the case, we need to make sure that we make the world accessible. And a lot of times you hear diversity and inclusion, but what does that actually mean when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, right? Does your building have a ramp, right? Does your building have braille for the bathroom? So for someone to find the
Yeah.
do you have, interpreting services available? If there's something happening, maybe just provide interpreting services. So one of the things that is really cool that's happening is a lot of artists or concerts across the nation. Some artists have just partnered up with what they call a deaf interpreter, and they are working with a deaf interpreter who is providing access on stage.
Wow.
To the left or the right of the stage. In front of the access area, and that deaf interpreter is then interpreting to the audience, and there's a hearing interpreter on the ground who is actually providing them the lyrics in more of an English word order, and then that deaf interpreter is putting out in their native language, which is sign language, to the audience, which is really cool to see that the mainstream world recognizes there's a need for access, stepping up to provide it. So there's definitely some change coming. You look at Dancing with the Stars, you have Niall DeMarco, Marley Matlin. You have all of these people who are deaf, and they're making it in Hollywood. It's like incredible to see. We're in such a special time.
Yeah.
So I think leveraging that and that legacy and then continuing to build on it. And I think the interpreting field has to keep up with that, right? So I don't think that this should be a barrier for deaf people to continue doing great things. And I can say this, not just Hollywood, right? I'm talking about from even political positions, right? Currently, there are a lot of places where deaf people can't run for public office because they won't provide an interpreter on the campaign trail. So how do they communicate? Are they paying that out of pocket? Like, how does that work?
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's multifaceted. It really is. And I think that not only have deaf people, obviously given me my job, right? That's the first thing I have to acknowledge, right? Is that I learned American Sign Language. I'm not from a deaf family. I have no deaf family members, but I have learned their language and that culture, and I feel so honored and privileged to do this job. And then now it's like, okay, great, you can do the job, but what are we doing to keep the interpreting field in a place where everyone can be successful and where access can actually happen on the scale that it needs to happen? Which is why when someone approached me to say, hey, can Core fly to another state? I was kind of like, this isn't my full-time gig. I've had over 25 states that want Core, and they're like,
wow.
I'm like, I'm not moving to your state, y'all. I'm staying in DC. I'm not moving to your state, but that's what I'm saying. There is a need there, and so why would you stop the growth, right? It feels like you want to keep that access. You want to keep pushing us forward. And I think Core is one part of a bigger equation that we have systemic issues, right, at large when it comes to access. And I do think that Core is helping to solve some of those problems. It will not be the only answer, but gap is what I'm really looking to support right now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is completely inspiring. Thank you for doing this work, really. I'm curious. I have so many questions, but a little time. I'm curious, how did you get into this work? Was there something that inspired you in the first place?
Yeah, so I met a deaf kiddo who was 4 at the time. Shout out Jordan, love him dearly, and his mom, at a camp that I was at, and he was the only deaf kid at the camp, and it was rough. I mean, we were unable to communicate with him. None of us knew sign. He was still picking up sign. His family was still picking up sign. And 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing parents. So it's imperative that parents learn sign language in order to have a freely open communication with their kid. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. And go to a deaf teacher, right? Like, have a deaf person teach you this language. can't emphasize that enough. But I would say for sure that one of the reasons why I got into this was because of Jordan, and he knows it. I've told him multiple times, and his mom does too. They're great people. But I would say that sparked it back in high school, and then my high school was a deaf feeder school, and so we had a bunch of and hard of hearing students in my school, and therefore we also had interpreters. And so because of that, I got to take American Sign Language as my foreign language. And so my high school ASL teacher, her name's Rose. She's incredible. Shout out to Rose. We love her too. Rose was like, you can do this. Like, I think you have, we call it in the field, you have it, which is like the sign for it is like you tap your stomach, like you have this intrinsic ability to do this job and to do it well, because it's a skill-based practitioner field. And so she was like, you have it, you should do this. So I decided to become an interpreter and go to school and play soccer and, shout out Maryville College. Then decided to become an interpreter. But it all goes back to Jordan and that summer camp. And it changed my life, So
I love that.
Still know his family today. Yeah, he's a grown adult. I'm like, it's wild. I'm so old. I'm so old when I talk to him.
Yeah, I had some similar experiences in working in special education and children at summer camps, and just being really connected in that way to what they were dealing with. And like, I know special education is different, and I think it can just be really powerful, like the early experiences that we have with children and with people in general. I think it's incredible that your school had interpreters, and I mean, I think that's so rare as far as I know. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it is required by law to have interpreters, but what is the quality of the interpreter? What support are they getting? Are they working alone for an 8-hour day, right? When you see sign language interpreters, you'll see a switch off every 20 minutes because your brain, they call it the mental load, is enormous, because you're taking an entirely different language, and then you're producing something with completely different syntax and grammar. It's not just word for word. And so a lot of people misunderstand them. And so, I would say for sure that's part of being within part of the deaf community, right? You learn so much about those experiences, those friends who were mainstreamed, and what was that experience like for them versus kids who went to deaf schools. And that's something that Gallaudet taught me too, is that, it's a deaf university. It's what they call the quote unquote Mecca of the deaf community, because it's the sole deaf university.
Wow.
So I had the opportunity to go there for grad school, and it was great because you got to meet deaf people from all across the world, and just their experiences, and it really does impact you. It makes you think about access in a way that, especially in other parts of the world, where you're like, wow, this is wild. It opens up the deaf community opens up a whole nother world. I could talk about it.
Last question. Just anything you want to share about your process of putting together this manual, writing this book. Like, what did you think it was going to be in terms of putting it together? What did it end up being? What was useful for you? What wasn't? I know these are a lot of questions in one, but just maybe like, what do you think would be the most valuable thing for someone to hear who is considering writing a book or writing a training manual specifically?
Oh, that's such a great question, June. So like I said, I started off with my infographics from Canva, my free app. I came to you and I was like, I have all these ideas. And you're like, cool, we have to flush those out. Like, you can't just like put infographics in a book and like call it a day. Like, there has to be some words. Like, I'm super visual, hence why, working as an ASL interpreter is a great fit for me. But I would say the main thing is understand, you might not know exactly what your end goal is, but if you can make a plan for yourself and follow that plan to the best of your ability, and be like transparent and open and honest with yourself, right? Like I think part of the writing process does require you to think outside of just yourself, because you have to think about the end user. And so specifically when it comes to adult learning in a training manual or a toolkit or whatever you want, a workbook, and specifically with adult learners, I think it's important that you consider your audience. And so I knew that my audience would be interpreters who are people who never went to an interpreter training program to people who have a PhD in this. And so you have to cater to all of those audiences, but at the same time, keep on your same mission.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to get lost in the weeds because you want to throw so many things in there, as you saw, June, and you just can't do that. You can't appease every single audience. So narrow down your audience, get to the place where you can be as true to the vision that you had for yourself and for the book, right? Yeah. Keep the heart of the book and the authenticity there.
Yeah.
And keep yourself on a schedule. Keep yourself with a clear plan in mind, because it's really easy to get lost in the weeds. What is it that people say, like, can't see the forest for the trees, right? It's really easy in the writing process to not feel like you can finish this thing. And I feel like most people I've spoken to that have written a book, that is a very common, very shared.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for just sharing with us. And I feel like I'm smarter, just after these few minutes. And I hope that folks listening do as well. I think this is wonderful what you're doing. And do you want to share like a link or anywhere that folks can people get the book outside of the training program, or, okay. Yeah. So if you want to say that, I'll also put it in the blurb for the podcast, but if there's anything you want to share out loud.
Yeah, for sure. So first things first, if you go to our website, so it's www.coreinterpreters.com, and that's just one word. And on there, the book is linked there. It's actually on Amazon.
Okay.
We do have a Kindle version of it, but I do think that because it's meant for people to be able to write in these pages and flesh out their ideas, I would recommend just buying the book. It's $30 on Amazon, which is not too steep of a price. I've tried to keep, price as a important aspect of it, of what I'm doing, to always be cognizant of that. But I would also say we have an Instagram account. It's called Core Interpreters USA. That's the handle. And then we're on Facebook also under Core Interpreters USA. And then each of our chapters has a Facebook page that they run. And that information can also be, if you type in Core USA to Facebook, it will pop up. And then the other chapters are all kind of linked together and posted on there. But yeah, that's what I would say is definitely the recommendation.
Perfect. And then for folks who want to share this with people, we will have an interpretation of this. So I'll just say that out loud for the deaf community. So just look for all of that and the links in the blurb with the podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.